business manager at Edgeley for many years, and now she is with the School Board Association. She does some of the BM certification, and so she is going to do an overview of business manager roles and responsibilities. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, everybody.
Wait a minute. Oh, whoa, news flash. I forgot. We have a birthday in the house. Lori Dahl, it's your birthday. Let's sing her happy birthday.
Diane did it. Another birthday too.
Woo. Woo. Happy birthday. And your name is?
My name is Nancy Reimer. I've been a business manager for 1 week.
Holy Toledo. There's a place in heaven for you. Okay, let's sing happy birthday to these two. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear.
Happy birthday, guys. As Diane said, I was a business manager at Edgeley for 12 years. And I came there after retiring from Deere & Company, got all my badges and everything else, and really didn't think about going back to work, but my kids were 7th graders, so I figured I better. And Edgeley and the school accounting system proved to be one of the biggest challenges I've ever encountered. I went from working with 2,400 people down to working with 30, and I think that was tougher in many ways than anything I had ever encountered. And I was a manager at Deere, and it's real hard to take on the business manager job when you've had those kind of responsibilities and understand budgeting and accounting and Windows, and you go to a DOS accounting system. Really big, that failed in the 11th month. And I had to do all my annual reports manually. So I sympathize with all you new business managers. Hopefully your accounting system is in much better shape now than mine was at Edgeley in 2002. And with that, we're going to get going here. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover what does business managers require under law or otherwise, and otherwise is in quotes, employment oversight and reports to the board, century code, mandated duties, and how to avoid the orange jumpsuits. If you ever come to any of my classes, you hear quite a bit about orange jumpsuits. Your challenges and ethics in you, because you're going to be faced with some of those, and things nobody told you about, but guess what? They're going to fall in your lap. And then we're going to have some time for some questions. So how many are from Fargo in this room? Anybody from Fargo? Okay. Whom do you report to? Let's have a show of hands. Who reports to the Board of Education? And who reports to the school board? And the correct answer is you all report to the school board. Fargo is the only North Dakota school district that has a Board of Education. So when you publish your minutes and say the minutes of the Board of Education, you are wrong. They are minutes of the school board. Keep that in mind. North Dakota Century Code clearly states that any decisions regarding selection and employment of school business managers and regarding the suspension and dismissal of school business managers belong to the board of the school district, not the superintendent, the board. The board shall exercise administrative oversight over the business manager unless there are specific things in policy that state otherwise, and there's clearly established through board action that that's what's going to take place. And that very, very, very seldom happens. Generally, the school board is your boss. If you have a situation in your district where the superintendent is your boss, and it has been designated by the board, it has to be in policy, and it has to be for your daily operations. Does anybody have that? Yikes. I think the board is shirking their duties. This is a big one. The business manager has specific duties in Century Code, mentioned over 100 times. I remember Daryl coming to me and saying, 100 times? Oh my God. You are specifically mentioned in Century Code for specific duties over 100 times. And you can find that in the North Dakota School Board's websites under resources. Look under school personnel documents and business manager duties. They're listed there. Don't be surprised. Your first duty under Century Code is to keep a true and accurate record of all school board proceedings. And that includes board meetings, committee meetings, public meetings, negotiations, and executive sessions. Notice the asterisk by executive sessions. The Attorney General for North Dakota has a wonderful general meeting notices and minutes, links. I believe this presentation is going to be out, given to Diane, and out on your website, so you'll have access to this. They also have an open meetings guide that is bar none the best and easiest to understand. So definition of a meeting. It's any gathering of a quorum of members, such as a school board, regarding public business, and includes committees, subcommittees, informal gatherings, that's a big one, work sessions, and discussions where a quorum of board members are participating by phone or other electronic communications, texts or emails, either at the same time or in a series of individual contacts. Other electronic communications include text, social media posts, emails, and so forth. So if you think the board is trying to avoid a meeting by the president calling a board member, and then that board member calling another board member, and so forth down the line, that is considered a meeting. And that would be a violation of open meetings laws if they're discussing public business. Want to make sure that's crystal clear. So if the board delegates any of the authority to 2 or more people, the newly formed committee is subject to the open meeting laws. Even if the committee does not have final authority or is just fact-finding, 2 or more people on a committee is considered subject to the open meetings laws. It's still a committee, even though it's 2 people. Committee meetings must be noticed, posted electronically, so forth. Emails or text messages between members of a committee or subcommittee regarding public business may constitute a meeting, and they would violate open meeting laws. What would you do? So you know the board had an undocumented meeting. They're out at the coffee shop talking, and all of a sudden it turns to school business. And there's 4 of the 5 members there. And you just happen to find out about this. What would you as a business manager do? Anybody? Well, what did you say? We had this happen at Edgeley. I asked for a place on the next agenda, and I told them in no uncertain terms, I read them the definition of a meeting. what's considered a quorum. They had no doubt. I said, now, are you guys discussing public business in the public with a quorum of members present and not noticing it? And is it open? It's an open public meeting. So do you want to wear the orange jumpsuits? But, you know, they were like kind of taken aback. Because normally as a business manager, I didn't say very much. But I did it that case, and that quelched that. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, if it's a training seminar or just a purely social gathering, you know, we're going over to so-and-so's house to have eggnog, Christmas time. That's not a meeting. But as soon as that discussion turns to public business, and there's a quorum there, it is a public meeting and should be noticed. So meeting notices are required for all meetings of the board, including committees and subcommittees. Generally, there is no minimum advance notice for public meetings. So if you all of a sudden have, it's late 4 o'clock in the afternoon and somebody submits their resignation and you need to call a special meeting and you're going to do that the next day, as long as you have done everything properly as far as noticing meetings, which we're going to cover coming up here. Your notice would have to have the date, the time, the location, in other words, when the board was notified about this. And if an executive session is also anticipated, like for negotiations or non-renewal or whatever, suspension, include the executive session as an agenda item, along with the subject matter and the legal authority for the executive session. You have to do that on meeting notices. At the same time the board is notified of the meeting notice must be posted at the main office of the district, if the district has a main office, posted at the location of the meeting, if held somewhere other than the district's main office, posted in the district's website or filed with the county auditor, provided to any individual who has requested notice of meetings. And notice of special or emergency meetings also must be given to the district's official newspaper. Generally, there is no requirement that the meeting notice has to be published. As long as you follow through on those top 4 things, you can just go ahead and have your meeting. Here's another big important one. I don't know if you guys have ever had the public at your meeting and they all want to talk and they're not on the agenda. Keep this in mind. A member of the public has the right to attend an open meeting and to record the meeting, but does not have the right to speak. If they are not on the agenda, they are not allowed to speak. And if they insist and they get unruly, adjourn the meeting. Leave the room. Get them out of the school. Do whatever has to be done. Is that clear? Okay. This is another important one. Board meetings board meetings are for board discussion. I would encourage you to keep quiet. And unless the board asks for your input, or you need to correct something they're talking about, just sit there. You are not an active participant. I used to back my chair away from the table and just look down at the floor. You don't need to have eye contact with anybody else. Your job is to record the motions, not the emotions, and not become involved in them. So if you have executive sessions, board committees, special meetings, negotiation, board retreats, that's what we're going to cover next. For executive session, the board first convenes in an open session and passes a motion to hold the executive session. And during the open portion of the meeting, the topics to be discussed or considered are announced. You have to record executive sessions. I don't care if it's on little tape machines or digital recorders or on your phone, you have to record them. The topics discussed during the executive session are limited to those announced in the open public meeting and authorized by law. And that authorized by law I should have highlighted, because I get so many calls, you know, we've got a coach, you know, and he's just not doing his job, and we're gonna have an executive session and just hash through it. Can't do that. It's not one of the reasons. And by the way, anytime you see that little yellow thing at the bottom, that's the actual century code. And the other thing I should have announced when I first got here, Amy DeCook was supposed to, our legal counsel at NDSBA, was supposed to present with me, but unfortunately, she had a family business she had to attend to today, so I'm here on my lonesome. So, stand back. The board may only hold an executive session to consider and discuss, and these are the reasons: adversarial administrative proceedings, litigation, contracts which are currently being negotiated, for which negotiation is reasonably likely to occur in the immediate future. However, negotiation caucuses of the board with negotiators in executive session, you can do that. You can talk to your negotiations, give them instructions. You just can't pass any motions in executive session.
Is that one have to be recorded also?
No. We have, you know, I don't think it's gonna hurt anything, but it doesn't have to be. The board may only hold an executive session to discuss non-renewal of a probationary teacher or principal employed less than 2 years, or contemplated non-renewal hearing for a teacher, discharge for cause hearing and suspension during discharge proceedings, confidential applications for employment. So if you're looking for a new superintendent, as long as you have 3 or more applications, you can hold it in executive session to hold it. But once they're established, no more executive sessions. If you're discussing personal, medical, or employee assistance records for applicants, employees, or former employees, that's okay to have an executive session. Or if you're discussing student records, only discussion of educational records is allowed, and it's not for a general gripe session. You know, I just don't like that kid. You know, he always has his hair tone funny and he doesn't smell good. And yeah, none of that. It's just educational records. For attorney consultation, if you're discussing security plans, nobody else needs to know that outside the district. For attorney work products, so if you've hired an attorney and they're coming to discuss it with you, you can do that in executive session. For contractual investigatory work product, so if you've had, doesn't have to be an attorney, but if you've got information about the contractor, you're thinking about having sick bank in the negotiated agreement, that type of stuff, you can all have an executive session to consider or discuss closed or confidential records. When an open meeting would have an adverse fiscal effect on bargaining or litigation position for the district, so this would be for your negotiations. If you have a record revealing negotiation strategy or instructions under this section, that's exempt. It's not an open record. If you have drafts of contracts or agreements subject to negotiations are exempt, but only if release would have an adverse fiscal effect on the district, unless the records are otherwise exempt or confidential. So those are the 12 things, and if it's not on this list, you cannot have an executive session. Yes?
The student record piece of it. Our board, a couple of years ago, met in executive session to decide whether a student who wasn't eligible to graduate could still walk and just not receive their diploma because they plan to get their coursework done over the summer. Is that?
Did you see it on the list?
No, I know student record, I didn't know if that would fall under.
Student records would be if you're thinking about suspension or expulsion, if you're discussing their health records or that type of thing.
So that discussion would have to be an open. Yep.
And it shouldn't be at a board meeting anyway. Isn't that something you don't want to have student names in the board minutes, do you? No.
So how does the board go about that though?
Do they have a superintendent?
They do, but it's always been the board's call.
Well, then maybe they need to have a subcommittee of maybe the board president, the superintendent, maybe the counselor meeting and talking about this, so it's not an official meeting. Come to some kind of consensus. You know, there's other ways to get around it. I wish Amy was here because she'd have all kinds of ideas for you. But keep that in mind and write to Amy DeCook at our office her emails at the end here. And we'll get that taken care of for you. Mhm. Any final action on topics discussed or considered at an executive session must take place at an open public meeting. You do not pass any type of business during executive session. No roll call votes, nothing. You can come to a consensus. You cannot vote on it officially until it's an open meeting. So unless final action is otherwise required by law to be taken during a closed or confidential meeting, final action means any collective decision or collective commitment or promise to make a decision on any matter, including formation of a position or policy, but does not include guidance given to members of the board, to legal counsel, or to other negotiators in a closed attorney consultation or negotiation prep session authorized under law. This mentioned guidance, not passing motions in executive session.
Well, Patty,
Yes.
one that hasn't really hit the streets yet, but I think it's going to be Evie's opinion soon, is the board just made a motion to come out of executive session. And that was questioned.
So I'm sure that's a question.
You should not do any motions.
No
roll call,
motions.
Nothing. President just brings you out of executive session.
So did everybody hear? Okay. No motions in executive session. Thank you for that.
Just for simply coming out of the meeting, which
Yep.
seems crazy.
Yep. Because as you'll see as we go along here, you have to know what time we went into executive session and what time we came out. So a settlement agreement between the district and another party, teachers for example, is exempt from disclosure until it's been fully executed and accepted by all covered parties unless the records are otherwise exempt or confidential, student records, for example. So, in other words, when you've got your local TV or newspaper there saying, what did you decide? What's happening with the negotiated agreement? What's going on? Until the teachers have signed it and until the board has signed it and it's fully executed, they are closed records. Okay? Please remember, student names should never appear if official board action is taken regarding that student, ever. So who can attend an executive session? Only the members of the school board and those individuals deemed necessary to function of a closed meeting of the board, such as the superintendent, yourself, maybe the principal, depending on what's going on. Those individuals listed in the law pertaining to executive session, if you've got a hearing officer, for instance, and only those listed above will be in attendance at executive sessions unless the law requires otherwise. So it doesn't say public, it doesn't say parent, that's what it says, okay? The minutes of an open meeting during which an executive session is going to be held must indicate the names of those attending, the date and time was called to order, and when it was adjourned. That's very important. and a summary of the general confidential information. So that means executive session, we're going into executive session to discuss negotiation strategy. Not to say, we're gonna give them $400 on the base and 2 extra bereavement days. It should be about 4 words long. That's your confidential information on executive sessions. No specifics should be given. And then you need the legal authority for holding the executive session. If you need help with any of this, Amy or I, and we've got policy on it. It's great. The location of recording and documents of an executive session, they have to be sealed in an envelope with the date of the executive session, the purpose of it, negotiation strategy, and the word confidential written on the outside of the envelope. They need to be in a locked storage area, like a safe, that people don't have any access to, and they need to be retained for at least 6 years if the executive session related to anything with contract negotiations, non-renewal, discharge, or expulsion. Yes?
We've converted to a cloud storage, and all of that's confidential and locked. And we're told by the lawyer that that's a legal location to store.
This came out of that North Dakota Century Code. What does that say? Envelope, locked location. And yes,
Do you have to have a board motion to dispose of these?
yes, that's part of your record retention schedule. Yep. I have to tell you, when I do business manager roles and responsibility during the certification course, that's a 3-hour class. This is an hour and a half, and I've gone a half hour now, and we're on slide 28 of 127. So we're gonna speed this up, guys. Only the following individuals can view or listen to executive sessions. Those individuals in attendance at the executive session at the Attorney General's request pursuant to a court order or by majority vote of the board unless the executive session was required to be confidential. The board can't make a motion in executive session, but can provide instructions to your negotiating team. And if you're in, as we went through impasse, so the negotiating team can request authority from the board to make a final offer before impasse, and the board's negotiating team then meets with the teacher's negotiating team to negotiate and make a final offer. When and if the offer is rejected, the board waives the mediation and declares impasse, and then you contact the fact-finding commission. God help you, I hope none of you have to go through that. That's awful. Here's a good one. Have you ever had those unconscious board members? And, you know, they don't act like they're having any input or anything else, but as soon as they leave the meeting, they're out misrepresenting the facts or what was said or talking about an executive session or district patrons or other employees. Anybody? Yeah. What you do in this case, again, is ask for time on your board agenda. Read them the North Dakota laws, or give them a copy of it, and remind them they cannot be doing that, that there's one way to really solve this problem, and that's coming up in a slide or two here. But first, we're going to talk about negotiation minutes should be taken by you, not alternated between the teachers and what else have you. That has led to nothing but trouble from what I've heard. You can record negotiation meetings. What a thought. And I highly, highly recommend that. The more detailed the minutes, the better. But negotiations seem to shorten what was said. The year we went to impasse, we had a teacher that said, the minutes are wrong. I said, really? She said, yeah, you have this here. I said, yeah, that's what I have in my minutes, and that's what I recorded. And she said, Well, I didn't mean that. You need to change that. Said, I'm not changing it. That's why I'm saying recordings will save you and the district if you ever go to impasse. And I had them all recorded when we did go to impasse. And we won. The district won. So if you record the negotiation meetings, I posted them to the school website so everybody in town could hear it. Boy, was that great. There wasn't any debate about what was said or by whom. And it greatly improved behavior at meetings. You know, there was no more of this confrontation stuff. When the next meeting rolled around, it also squelched all those rumors outside the building. When people know they're going to be recorded, behavior is a miraculous thing. It's just like, wow, it's a miracle. Questions on that? Okay. So if the board creates a committee and asks the committee to perform a function, and that committee is deemed to be doing public business and must abide by the same notice requirements as the school board, including minutes, and there's the Attorney General's opinion. Remember, 2 or more board members. This is the case that the school board creates a committee that is entirely made of school board members, majority of school board members, minority of school board members, individuals who are not school board members. In other words, you need to always notice a committee meeting and take minutes. For special board meetings, there's some special rules. These are meetings that are outside regular school board meeting schedule. There's usually an urgent need for it. You know, somebody's goofed up and the teacher is resigned or being expelled or suspended, or you're meeting with legal counsel. All those open meeting requirements apply. The exception is, on special school board meetings, only the agenda items can be discussed and no new agenda items can be added. Period. Just what the agenda says. The board can also meet in work retreats at a time and place conducive to in-depth discussion of policies and goals for the district. These meetings and retreats are open to the public and subject to same notice requirements as other school board meetings. Generally, at a retreat, you are going to have public input and you want that. So, make sure that's on the agenda. Check your district's policy, BC, for the school board's meetings of the board, and see if any official action can be taken at your board retreat. And do you think it would be a good idea to have a board retreat 90 miles outside the district? Never a good idea. You've got to make it so it's easy for your patrons to attend. It's a public meeting. Number 2, you guys need to hold all the books and records of the district and deliver them to the business manager successor for office. I always think of that. I think of all those file cabinets and boxes under my desk, and I'm supposed to hold those. Give me a break. So for record retention, you should have this policy. It's ABCD, easy to remember. But there's things you should remember if you have records that have litigation hold on them. These including electronic documents such as email or texts, but it's not limited to those. Phone calls, notes, that type of thing. You need to, if you're replying to an open record request or prepare for foreseeable litigation, you might just want to hold on to those records they're looking for. If you have a formal complaint, a subpoena, notification of lawsuit received, litigation is threatened, a regulatory or governmental body like OCR, gives me shakes, just think about it, begin an investigation. Attorney requests facts or documents related to an incident or dispute if there's been an injury. Open records request is made, or if an employee or student requests access to records. Consult your district's attorneys for retention recommendations on items under this litigation hold. These are the type of things you need to hold on longer than the recommended hold. Number 3, prepare and submit an annual report to the board and the county superintendent of schools or your county auditor, for those of you that don't have a county sup. Generally, these are the annual financial reports and reports for publication. Ideally, have your auditor perform the audit before the reports are presented to the board to be approved. And I know auditors are just another subject of discussion. We're not going to cover it this time. We'll just move on here. How often should you have a district? The state auditor must audit a school district every 2 years. When it says a state auditor, that can be an auditor's report submitted to the state for them to review, or the state could actually come out and do it. To protect yourself in the district, have an audit performed every single year. But I always ask them before they left, should I do anything differently? What changes should I make so that their job is easier? So they're not there for 3 days. You can get them in and out of there in a day if you have everything the way they want it. Authorize the preparation of all negotiable instruments as directed by the board. Negotiable instruments are an unconditional promise to pay and include check drafts, bearer bonds, some certificates of deposit, promissory note, bank notes. It is transferable, signed documents, promise to pay the bearer a sum of money at a future date or on demand. So that'd be your checks. We love checks on payday, don't we, girls and boys? Business manager, perform all duties under the law. More than 100 of them, just saying. So what would you do if you discover the kitchen staff have been ordering food and kitchen items from vendors for personal use and paying the vendors directly? How many of you think that's legal? The IRS really frowns on avoiding taxes. Really, really, really. And this is an egregious thing to have happen in a district. And I know when I first came to Angeli, I know stuff was walking out the door. But I put a stop to that, and we passed policy saying, you're defrauding the district, you are gone. You make a choice. Perform all duties required by law. These 6 words encompass 100 duties mentioned in law. They also include all the federal, state, and local things that you guys get to do. Titles, grants, foundation aid, levies, tuition, all that lovely stuff. Number 6, perform all duties required by the board. Here's the list. This is about that much of what they're going to require you to do. Everything from board meetings, budgets, accounts payable, general ledgers, audits, cafeteria plans, you name it, guys. It goes on and on. Now we're going to talk about elections, and we've had elections training, and I'm going to go through this very fast. But April 1st to June 30th, the board can schedule their school board elections. And most districts have either a 3 or 4 year term. Sometimes you might have a board member that comes in for a year or 2 to fill expiring term, or 3 or 4 year terms. Timelines for the election process is on our website. And that's the link. And we have an election handbook that is to die for. So here it gives the timelines. So notice the deadline to publish in the official newspaper that you're looking for candidate names. Better have time enough when the board schedules that school board election to make sure you're out far enough, like February, to start meeting all these deadlines. This will, like I said, I'm not going to cover this except this first top one that's in yellow, On the 13th day after the election, the board will canvass the election returns and the results of the election. It used to be 6, but it's not saying close to the 13th day after, it's saying on the 13th day. And then within 3 days, you have to send notice to the elected official. You can certify the election and their terms for the board members. And then they have to take the oath of office. So does it matter what name is posted first on the ballot? It absolutely does. It has to be done through some sort of innocuous way that's not favoring one person over another. I used to take fingernail polish and make a pink quarter and throw it in a bag with a bunch of other ones, and whoever got the pink quarter got their name on the ballot first. Threw it back in, next one would do it, whatever. But rock, paper, scissors, whatever. And again, if the individual receiving the highest number of votes must be elected. Now, we had a young man in Edgeley, his name was Tudor. You can guess why. And dear Tudor almost got elected to the board when we had 7 people in an election one year, file elections, ballots. But if he got more votes than our board president did at the time, he would be the official winner. They have to take an affirmation or oath of office within 10 days and before commencing duties. And new board members, if they're elected at the regular school board election, officially become members of the school board at the board's annual meeting, not before, at the board's annual meeting. And then every 2 years, according to law, the electors can determine whether a record of board proceedings must be published in the official newspaper of the district, yea or nay. And if approved, you should provide the publication of minutes of meetings, including itemized list of obligations approved for payment. You should ensure the proceedings are published within a reasonable time of each board meeting. We've had instances where the district sent in the meeting minutes and so forth to the publisher of the newspaper, and they wouldn't publish them until they were threatened with action by the Attorney General's office 6 months later. So now we're going to talk about payroll and HR responsibilities. So your background check is the main thing you guys need to get completed before you start creating files and listing their employment date, wages, and positions held, and benefits, and complete W-4s and I-9. You absolutely need a copy of their Social Security card and have their employee file exactly as the spelling on their Social Security card. If they've gotten married and haven't changed it, oh well, that is not your job. They need to get that Social Security number and card updated. We had an individual who had coached for years at Edgeley when I got there, and the former business manager had not only had his name wrong, but his Social Security number wrong. That was a big mess for him to clear up. You need a copy of their driver's license. That's just a form of information and verification that they are in fact citizens. And if they're a teacher or a sub, you need a copy of their license. Make sure it is valid. TFFR approves form. If you have direct deposit, you'll need that. Any medical, life, disability insurance forms. And if you have somebody who has a spouse who has insurance coverage that they're providing for your employee, you should get a waiver of coverage from whoever. Blue Cross Blue Shield has it, Sanford has it. Just get an insurance waiver. So if something ever happens where that spouse loses their coverage or dies, there's no 30-day waiting period. You get coverage immediately under the employer's coverage. Other things to consider: if you have a cafeteria or flex spending sign-up form eligibility, And then you have to see that the cafeteria or flex spending forms are completed and filed. Leave balance is established and recorded, and that they have a copy of the staff handbook. And I always used to make them sign for that, so they could never say, oh, I don't remember reading about that policy. Here's your signature about that bullying. Give them a copy of the CHIRPA notification, whether they're an employee, is enrolling in group insurance or not, and it just notifies the employee of potential premium assistance subsidies currently available. Give teaching staff a copy of the negotiated agreement, and every single employee should have a payroll schedule. Put it by the time clock, note all the pay days, when time cards are due. They learn real fast. I don't chase them around for their time cards. If they can't turn them in, they don't get paid. Note when and how and whom to report sick days and time off to, and define your pay periods. And this is in law. It has to be a week's period, generally from like 12 a.m. Sunday morning through 11:59.99 on Saturday night. And then what effect overtime has on your calculation. And you can get a lot of help for that with the required payroll posters. Give a class schedule to all your staff. If they're a bus driver, get a copy of their DOT medical certification card. I have to tell you, we had a bus driver named Doug. I knew for a fact Doug was blind in his left eye. So I was interested to see what would happen when he went to get his medical certification. He came in with it. I said, how did you manage that? And he said, I went in, the doctor said, cover your right eye. Okay, and he read everything. He said, cover your left eye. So he had his left eye covered the entire time, so he could read with his right eye, and the doctor didn't notice. Way to go, Doug. File a new hire reporting form, and that's through the Child Enforcement Unit with the state of North Dakota. So if you've got an employee who hasn't been there at least 60 days in a row, you need to file a new form. I used to file a form every beginning of school of all of our substitute teachers that I knew about. Now Diane warned me this doesn't have brakes, so whee, that was exciting. There we go. Okay. All employees should sign a verification of employment form. It's like your employee detail listing if you use Software Limited. How about? Is that better? No. Now try it.
Turn on the button.
It's green.
Okay.
Let's try.
How about now?
Okay. If you have an employee detail listing from Software Limited, I used to put a statement in at the bottom. Wages will be deducted for actual time absent in excess of allotted leave balances. And that would affect the teachers basically, because otherwise if you're an hourly employee, it doesn't matter anyway. You aren't going to get paid if you're not there. You need to give a class schedule to all your staff and make sure that they understand what's going on when. Okay. Why is this not going? Okay. Reminder, it's unlawful to collect information on gender, date of birth, marital status, citizenship of the applicant until after the applicant is hired as an employee. Contracts. Teachers, certified staff, yes, they all have contracts. Business managers, generally no. Business managers don't generally meet the requirements of an exempt employment under the Fair Labor Standards Act and would be subject to overtime requirements. If you take the certification classes, we cover a lot of that in payroll. Bus drivers, generally no. Coaches. If an extracurricular duties appear on a teacher contract, the contract should contain language that states extracurricular assignments are not subject to continuing contract law. You don't want them to think they get to be coached every year just because they weren't last year. Always get a W-9, no matter if an employee or a contracted individual. I would not pay any of those contracted coaches until I have that. You give me the W-9, I give you your check. If hired through the North Dakota High School Activities Association, I would pay the referee fee on one line and the transportation reimbursement on a separate line. Because otherwise you're gonna get calls at the end of the year saying, well, it says I earned $600, but a lot of that was transportation reimbursements. How much of it was? And then you're going back to look it up. If it's on the pay stub, that's their problem, not yours. Now this is a big one. If mileage is reimbursed to a school board member for traveling to and from their home, for our board meeting, it's called commuting by the IRS, and it's subject to payroll taxes. You would have to pay them for that board meeting through payroll for those miles. If there's meal reimbursements and there's no overnight stay, again, this is IRS code. If you don't stay overnight, it's taxable payroll income. So set up your payroll codes to reflect taxable travel, taxable meals. For accounts payable, the board can adopt policies governing the disbursement of district money for policies may include authorization, creation, and approval of negotiable instruments, use of credit or debit cards, payment of invoices, use of petty cash, electronic payments, and use of facsimile signatures. How many of you have a name stamp for you as business manager? Do you keep it at the school? Not a good idea. That's an invitation to fraud. Get that out of the school, bring it home, and hide it. Policies adopted under this subsection must include internal controls and safeguard school district money, and that's in law. You have to have internal controls. And when I say internal controls, I get a lot of deer in the headlights look, so we're going to cover some of that coming up. If you have a teacher, superintendent, board member submits a request for reimbursement for a meeting you know they didn't attend, what would you do? We actually had a part-time cook that said she went to a food seminar, and I know she didn't because on Facebook she was out water skiing, and so I said to her, do you have any of the materials from the class? No. Do you have anybody who will verify you were there? Yep. I said, are they ready to wear an orange jumpsuit? She looked at me and I said, this is what we have. Unless you can provide something in writing that you were there from the sponsors, you are not getting paid. I never had any of those types of requests again. So don't be afraid. You're in charge of the money. You wear the orange jumpsuit if things go wrong. Keep that in mind. So we talked about name stamps. They're generally signed by the business manager and one authorized signer for the, your general ledger and your capital projects, reserve fund for debt services. That should all be board president. Whoever your designated overseer of your food services, it would be for your hot lunch, and generally in activities, that would be your athletic director or high school principal, and you. So if you have a name stamp for your board president, you can get those stamps out fast. Your signature, if at all possible, should be handwritten, legible. I was kind of anal about this. All of our checks are different colors. So for each of the checks, I had to pen that color. So if it's a green check, I had green ink on that. Yeah. So you can do whatever you want to. My successor thought that was rather stupid. That probably is. But so every time you run and post checks, run a balance sheet, people. Make sure you have enough funds. I can't tell you how many times I've had business managers calling me at 4 in the morning. I just woke up and I realized I didn't have enough money in the checks, and then I just do it in the morning. It's 4 in the morning. I'm on vacation. I'm in Mexico. Okay. Make sure you've got your funds transferred if your balances needed to be hiked up here. Another thing is, if you're writing a receipt, make sure whoever you're giving it to has signed it. I don't care if it's a third grader and they have to put Jack on it. That just says that I gave you, the receipt said $10 and it means $10. It's not $100 when they come back a couple months from now and say, I gave you $100 and you wrote this for 10. No, I didn't. Your signature's on here. So every time you make a deposit, I would have the teller sign the deposit slip. That was just proof positive that that deposit was actually as it was supposed to be. There was nobody changing the receipts or anything, no funny business going on. Just have them initial it. They're happy to do it, and the auditors think it's great. So now we're going to go to budgets. When you come to working with budgets, you have to be able to work with your superintendent. And I know in the past, we've had superintendents that insist that they're going to do the budget and the business manager knows nothing about it. That's not a good plan. You have to work as a team. He's going to know about the consolidated grant, expected revenues, and then you have to work on transportation costs. You're going to know all the payroll costs because you're going to know how many hours these employees are working, their contracted costs, all that stuff. So you need to have a collaborative effort to get through this. So how many of you believe if you allowed just your superintendent to do the budget, you'd be bang on? One person, 2 people. Okay. If you have that, great. If you don't, remember who's in charge of the budgets. You. So create a budget comparison of the current and the next fiscal year for the budget for board approval. The preliminary certificate of levy is due August 10th, and the final budget has to be in by the 10th of October. And there were times I would leave Edgeley and drive over to Lauren, drop it off at the county auditors on the 10th of October because we had a board meeting on the 9th, late at night, and I was up there before the office opened on the 10th and handed it to them. They have to have it by the 10th. So now we're going to talk about insurance. How many think insurance is just the coolest thing anyone and all kinds of good stuff? Well, I'm a former insurance agent, so buckle up, guys. I was an insurance agent for over 20 years. I was licensed for everything. So I can tell you horror stories, so we'll cover a couple of them here. But insurance, for our purposes at the school, would cover workforce safety and insurance, unemployment compensation, liability insurance for the district, vehicle insurance, property insurance, blanket bonds, and a few miscellaneous, which we'll cover. This example actually happened to me. It wasn't at the school. It was when I was working as an insurance agent. But I had gotten my licensing, but he was asking me to do stuff in an area I wasn't licensed for. I was asked to falsify an insurance application, saying there were only 3 minor losses when in fact there were 8. And 2 of them were major. I refused, but then I found out he had done it anyway. So I wrote to the insurance company and I said, you know, this is our agent's best friend. I know he feels obligated that he has to help this guy, but this is what happened. And I think you should be aware of that. And some time went by, and all of a sudden the door opens and there were 4 guys in really crisp looking suits that walked in and sat with him in his office for an hour and a half. And I don't know what the outcome was. They kept him as an agent, but I think it was their come to Jesus meeting. But remember, if you are sending that stuff in and you know it is false, you are complicit. Can you say orange jumpsuit? For workforce safety and insurance, if you absolutely at all can file it within the first 24 hours, sometimes they don't let you know, but file it as soon as you absolutely can. You have to file that. Do it even if they say, I'm fine, you know, I'm going to be just great. And then they come back maybe weeks or even months later and say, you know, when I fell down, I really hurt my back and it's really bothering me now and I'm going to file for work comp. If they don't have that first report of injury form on file and they know about it, you guys are assumed to be liable. In other words, you don't have anything to say about this. They're going to pay this person, whether it's true or not. So file that first report of injury. You have to file an annual report by the internet, and it's due the 31st of August each year for WSI. So here's our kitchen help with the water skis again. An employee had filed claim for a back injury through workers' comp. When at work, the employee appears to be in pain and weak, and then you see him on social media that shows him water skiing at evening and apparently pain-free. You call work comp right away and report it. I even sent him a copy of the social media thing. Guess what? It was denied. And I let my employee know I had done it, so they weren't accusing anybody else. You have to have broad shoulders sometime. Now, some of you may or may not know this, especially whoever that poor soul was that's been here a week. How many of you have the group account unemployment insurance through School Boards Association? Yeah, quite a bit of you. Okay. Group account, when I came to Edgeley, I had no clue what group account was. Group account meant nothing to me. And then I found out that our school boards handles all that stuff, and all the claims come into our office, and we disseminate them to you. We'll be asking questions, or there's an audit, or whatever. All job services inquiries are forwarded to you from our office. And all replies should come back to our office, not going to job service. Otherwise, we can't help you if you're ever in a situation where you have to have a hearing or something. God help us. You never ever make a payment to job service if you're with group account. NDSBA members' claims are paid through the group account reserves. Respond to any claims questions immediately and by the due date. If you don't, they only give us 5 days. If we don't have it back to them in 5 days, same kind of thing happens. Oh, you're guilty then. You can't appeal a hearing. There's no appeal if you fail to do that. So even if you know that this bum is not doing what he should be doing, and you don't reply, they're gonna get their unemployment insurance because you did not do your job. All the information you supply on the claims form is confidential. I can't tell you how important that is. We yuck it up when we read some of these responses because we know you're telling us the truth. So be honest and describe the termination. Don't say, oh, he was terminated for insubordination. This isn't an actual one. He was terminated for being drunk and impaired and was found passed up in the boiler room with a fifth of rum in his lap and a smoldering marijuana joint in his hand. Do you think there's any question about insubordination here? Coverage denied. Okay. I mean, come on. So don't be afraid to say it like it is. So yeah, that pretty much describes it. When we come to liability insurance, that's what's actually going to cover you for bodily injury and property damage to somebody else. If an employee slanders, or a student or a patron, or the district is sued, or the state doesn't follow state bidding guidelines, all of that's covered under your liability insurance. So it's things that the district had a oops, and they're going to cover for you. Okay? When it comes to vehicle insurance, how many of you own your school buses, have all your own school buses? Quite a few. How many of you have district vehicles like personal cars, vans? Okay. There's three parts to auto insurance: vehicle insurance, truck insurance, bus insurance. There's liability insurance, that's required by law. That covers for bodily injury, property damage, uninsured and underinsured motorists. So if your employees or your vehicle goes and happens to cause bodily injury or property damage to another, and you're at fault, that's what's going to pay for it. Optional insurance is comprehensive. That would be acts of God. Fire, lightning, tornado, hitting a deer, glass breakage, theft, flood, vandalism, all that stuff. Those are acts of God. That's subject to a deductible. You don't have to have it. That is optional coverage. And finally, the third section is collision. Again, this is optional, but you can't have collision unless you have the acts of God and the comprehensive part. You have to have all three parts to have collision. And that's when your vehicle causes damage to someone else's property. Or, causes harm. An example would be if you collide with another object or the district vehicle overturns as a result of an accident, that's going to cover your car if it's your fault, but it's also going to cover the other car if it's your fault, and that is subject to a deductible. If you get hit by another's car and they have liability insurance, their property damage is going to pay for your car to get fixed. Okay? So collision covers you when you want your car fixed because it's nice. And whether it's your fault or not, you're going to have coverage. Okay? So there's types of coverage for vehicles and buildings. ACV is actual cash value. That's what it's worth right now based on age, mileage, and current condition. So if you have a 1970 Gremlin, it's probably worth $150. That's actual cash value. If you have replacement cost, it's what would it cost to replace this vehicle of like kind of quality. And the deductible is the money the district pays when it's at fault for a collision. If you're not at fault, you don't pay the deductible. If the other party was at fault, that insurance will cover the district's deductible. So that's fast and furious on vehicles. Now we get to property. Building coverage is anything that's, the building and anything that's attached to it. So blinds, lockers, walk-in coolers, light fixtures, plumbing, furnaces, water heaters, AC units, and so forth. That's covered under the building coverage. Under contents, that's anything you brought into the building. So when you moved in, you brought the desks and the computers and the supplies and the wash buckets and all that stuff. That is contents. All your library books, copiers, that type of thing. And again, there's two basic types: actual cash value, what it's worth right now, based on age depreciation and current condition, and replacement cost. What it would cost to replace the building with like kind of quality, and deductible, what the district pays if there's a claim. So what's the difference? And when it comes to building coverage, this is big. After Northwood had their tornado, they had ACV coverage on the contents. So if you had a computer from 2002, it wasn't what it would cost to replace that. What was that thing worth that time? So that's why I listed the old dumb terminal there and an old CD player, because that's what they're going to base it on. It's not happy. The insured doesn't have to replace but new, but with like kind and quality, minus depreciation and any deductibles. So here's an example, and this should be a real eye-opener for some of you. If you have a building that's 50 years old and has a 100-year life, insured for $25,000, and it should be insured for $75,000, or 75 million, and it takes 10 million to make the school usable after a loss. Here's how they figure out this loss. If you have ACV coverage, you're going to take the insurance you have, divided by what you should have. Take that factor times the loss, minus depreciation, minus your deductible, to get to what they're going to pay you. So using that example, they're going to take 25 million divided by 75 million, that's 33%, times 10 million, minus 50% depreciation, because remember, 50 years of the 100 years is gone, minus your deductible. So out of that 10 million loss, the district would have to come up with $8,338,333. So they are paying about 20% of the loss. Whereas if you have replacement costs, they're going to use that same formula, what you have over what you should have, times the loss, minus your deductible, gets you to your payment. So that 33%, they haven't figured in any depreciation. They're going to take away their deductible. The district would still have to come up with $6,671,667. Either way you look at it, the board is not going to be happy. Not even close to happy. So when you insure your contents and your building, I recommend full replacement cost. You can determine replacement cost based on square footage, taking pictures of every single room, every open drawer, every open closet, everything in that room, or you can have that professionally done, which we did it actually. Northwest Evaluations did ours. Wonderful. They give you a CD, you send it to North Dakota Fire and Tornado, they download it, they call you, they say, great, okay, this is what you need, okay. And then they come back every year and rescan everything and see what's there and what's gone. It's great. I would recommend that. Blanket bonds, it's a blanket bond collectively covers district employees and officials that don't have to be listed by name or position, but it covers them for financial loss, fraud, that type of thing. Therefore, any new employees or officials are automatically covered under a blanket bond. North Dakota graciously gives us that at no cost. You have to send in an application, tell them what 25% of your annual expenditures are, and when you have the most money, and they ask you about signature stamps and checks and balances and that type of thing. This saves districts. When I first started as a business manager, one of my former classmates was a business manager and had been for 30 years. And I called her for some advice, and all of a sudden I saw her name in the paper because the district could only go back 2 years because they had approved the annual statements from, or financial statements from before that. But they estimate that she did everything there. She invoiced, she sold gates, she did everything. She was skimming money off the top, and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars went over that district over 30 years. But the insurance blanket bond only went back 2 years. But 2 years was enough to secure them financially to remain open and working. So don't neglect that. The other types of insurance you could have, and this is usually covered by your liability, somewhere along the dot line is equipment breakdown, boiler machinery, outdoor property coverage, personal property scheduled insurance. That would mean if somebody has their own property at the school that is used in a collective thing. One of our teachers brought in, this is when TVs were really expensive, their own TV, that would be the type of coverage you need. Inland marine coverage, that's a big word for things like you want to personally schedule every trombone, trumpet, drum, and what else have you in the music department, some of your computers, that type of thing. They're individually listed by serial number. The only thing I'm going to remind you of is if your district is constructing something, you're not responsible for it until you take official possession, and the board has to do that. The school board cannot enter into a contract involving the expenditure of an aggregate amount of more than $50,000 unless you publish 10 days before bid opening in the official newspaper of the district that that's what's going on, receive sealed bids, and accept bid at the lowest responsible bidder. You might get low bids, but if you know they're deadbeats and they're not going to perform, you don't have to accept that. You can also reject all, and that's the law that covers that. You have to keep a true and accurate record of district financial records. It's a given that you do that. You should, though, self-audit. Count all the remaining cash in your cash drawers after every deposit. If there's money left over, count that and make sure somebody knows. And by maintaining your running balance, like petty cash or incidental revolving, you will have any overages or underages taken care of. We had a Pee-wee wrestling tournament in Edgeley, and I counted the cash before and I counted it after, and we were $600 short. And I said, where does that cash go? And I talked to our athletic, well, people, all kinds of people were in the office and the safe was open. I said, excuse me? I said, well, we're $600 short. I just want you to know. If you report it then to your superintendent also, you're going to reduce the chances for fraud. If you have effective checks and balances, you should be able to pinpoint where that shortage or overage came from. In my case, the next week we had a game, and my gosh, all that money was back in the drawer. How did that happen? Somebody was using it as a bank. You need to prepare and submit a school district financial report to the board quarterly. Now here it's saying quarterly. I would suggest every month. So they're on top of, there's no question what's happening. You're doing your job. You suspect a principal of taking money from the cash boxes after game and before it's receipted. That's where effective checks and balances comes in. So if you have two people counting the cash boxes before they're giving to the gate for selling tickets and to the concessions for selling tickets, and you've counted every single concession item, all the cups, all the candy bars, how many buns, packages of buns you have, everything else. And then after the game, you're counting how many tickets were sold, how much cash is in the box, and there's two people doing it and signing it off, and not the same people who made the cash boxes to start with. And then the next day, the secretary comes in and recounts everything, makes the actual receipt, gives it to you, and then you count it again. How many chances do you think there's going to be for them just to give money? So in the case of that principal, he was walking the cash box from one building to another, and they suspected money was disappearing. So they did that, what I just said. They counted before, unknown to him, counted the number of tickets, unknown to him, and they had somebody count the money before it went to the other building. Then when it got to the other building, they counted it again, and sure enough, money was missing. He got an orange jumpsuit. Wasn't it Edgley? So if you prepare and submit a school district financial report to the board quarterly, or in the case of a business manager of a district having only a one-room schoolhouse to submit the report at the request of the board, there's very few one-room schoolhouses left here. The law says quarterly, but crudely it should be presented each month at the board meeting. And you need to produce all district financial records when directed to do so by the board. And that can get pretty involved, especially during negotiations. That includes actual records, reports, financials, spreadsheets for budget, and so forth. Maintain custody of all district monies coming into the business manager's hands. That means all money. That means you, not the activities director, not the superintendent or the cheer team. Money should always be made payable to the school district and always under your control. This is considered control. It's locked in a cash box in a locked file after properly receipting. It's in a safe with access limited to those covered by fidelity bond, that blanket bond we talked about. In savings, checking, money market, or CD, properly insured by a board-approved financial institution. And these examples of not in school or district business management custody are actual things I got from you guys. Not in a shoebox at the bottom of a closet. Not in a locked desk drawer. Not in a safe with access by an employee, student, parent, or visitor, wide open. Not in a classroom teacher's desk. Not in an envelope in the superintendent's desk. They think that's safer somehow. No IOUs in the cash box. The first time I went to make deposit, there were 3 IOUs in the cash box. We are not a bank, people. That ended. We're done. Hold on to your district keys. Do not give them out. If you lose them or they're misplaced, you have to rekey the whole school. That's a huge expense. You need to pay out district monies under the business manager's control as directed by the board. All that's saying is if you write a check and it's a board-approved check, general ledger, unless they've given you prior okay, yes, you can pay the credit card bill on the 20th so we don't get late fees. You have to get board approval. You have to get board approval on the first 4 funds in our general ledger. This means get permission from the board before you distribute accounts payable checks to vendors for funds 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, the school board's your boss. You are not your boss. Just because you write checks, you're not quite that important. So you need to receive and maintain custody of monies to which the district and board is entitled. Notice these last three are all about money and how it's handled. If you have a signed receipt for every transaction and you reconcile your bank statements and you keep accurate ACH transaction records, you're going to be fine. Make sure your journal entries are legible and make sense 5 years from now, even if you're not there. People can figure out what you did. And stay away from open safes unless you're getting a cash drawer. So what would you do if an administrator or a board member wants to be your friend on Facebook or some other social media platform? I would discourage that. You want to be above reproach. You don't want anything in anybody's hands that will give them something to talk about. And you don't want to know what they're doing anyway, really, do you? You see enough of them. So keep yourself out of trouble. If you have robust checks and balances or separation of powers, you don't want to have any opportunities for people to be alone with a cash box or around money unless absolutely necessary, like you making a deposit. It's too tempting for some people. They can't turn their back on that. Just make sure you're scarce around cash boxes unless you're making a deposit or reconciling it. So should business managers be taking money at the gate and selling tickets? Never. Should you be helping in concessions and selling concessions? Never. Your responsibility is to district funds and making deposits, period. You are not part of that echelon. Don't be tempted. Make opportunities for fraud hard for everyone. Establish auditor-approved checks and balances, and do not have cash drawers available except to make a deposit. I never knew the combination to the safe in Edgeley in 12 years of working there. Never. I didn't want to know. Somebody had to open that safe for me anytime I needed a cash drawer. And I recommend that. So if someone asks you a favor, ask yourself, are you following policy? Are you breaking the law? That's a good one. Am I being discriminatory? Should I report this request? Is it something that's really off the wall, and why are they coming to you with it? Will this create a liability situation for you or the district? And is their problem going to be your problem? Very important questions to ask. If they know you're asking those questions, they aren't going to come to you for weird stuff. And believe me, there's a lot of weird stuff out of there. Because then you're not in orange jumpsuits, girls and boys. So, you don't run the district. I have heard reports of different business managers telling teachers that they are in charge and I write your checks. You do not. The board does. And the board has to remain a neutral party during hearings. So if you know all the flack that's going on with some irresponsible teacher or student, you have to try your best to keep all that away from board members so they can be the impartial jury at a hearing. They have to be impartial. That's it, guys. We made it 2 minutes after. Sorry we ran over here.